Hello everyone and welcome to the weird, scary and horrible parts of humanity. Have you ever lived with a living landlord who is a bitch, but you can't afford to move out or find a new place, or perhaps lived with someone who you don't really get along with, but you don't have the balls to move out or tell them to get fucked, and you just end up living in a bizarre universe where you cohabit and don't really get along with each other or like each other for that matter? Well, that's kind of religion in the USSR. Despite Karl Marx calling it the opium of the masses and the goal of Gossatism, state atheism, many of the religions that pre-existed the rise of the USSR continue to exist and grow during the Soviet Union. Ultimately, it helps to explain why many of the former USSR countries remain some of the most religious countries in the world. Indeed, as of 2020, 84.5% of the Georgian population is Eastern Orthodox, with about 83% of those Georgian Orthodox, a further 11% are Muslim, and only 3% have no religion. Equally in Mother Russia, while the Russian Public Operation Foundation found that 24% of the population is not religious, 60% of the population, in 2022, identified themselves as Orthodox Christians. But just like a bad roommate, religion and the government of the USSR sort of just coexisted as an unhappy cohabitation, and indeed religion played a role in the end of some communist regimes in the Eastern Bloc. In Lithuania, the Catholic Church led resistance against the Soviet regime throughout the country's occupation, with underground activity manifesting throughout the 1970s, and following Operation Barbarossa in 1941, a total of 15 priests were murdered by Soviet troops. Many Lithuanian Catholic priests and nuns were sent to gulags under Stalin. Moreover, it was the attempt to extradite Hungarian pastor Laszlo Tokic of the Hungarian Reformed Church, who strongly protested against the Nicolae Ceausescu communist regime in Romania, from Timisoara on the 16th of December 1989, which gave rise to the Timisoara uprising and the ultimate fall of the Ceausescu communist regime in 1989 as a result of the 1989 Romanian Revolution. The Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic, now modern-day Georgia, was part of the Soviet Union. The Georgian clergyman under the Georgian Orthodox Church, Teimuraz Chikhladze, suggested to his flock that they should defect from the Soviet Union. He had previously been arrested as of the 2nd of February 1983 for ideological support of an anti-Soviet terrorist group. Many of his flock were young people, amongst the so-called golden youth, young people of the upper classes, who in the USSR manifested from the late 1970s until the early 1980s. This was pretty unique, as all of the terrorists lived very cushy, high upper-class lives of the Soviet Union, and hence didn't necessarily fit the bill of the usual defectors from the Soviet Union, many of whom defected for political reasons. Indeed, many of the hijackers had parents who were in the Soviet government. Initially, Chikhladze was going to participate in the hijacking. However, at the time, he was overseas as part of the church and decided not to participate. The original aim was him to have pistols and grenades under his cassock, which he would carry on the hijacked aircraft. As a result, there were 7 hijackers aged between 19 and 32. The alleged leader was 25-year-old Soso Konstantovich Tistratelli. His father, Grigorievich Tistratelli, was a Georgian Soviet philologist, a corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences of the Georgian SSR. Tistratelli graduated from the Tbilisi Academy of Arts and was an actor at the Order of Lenin film studio called Georgia Film. The youngest was Tina Vladimirovna Petviashvili, who was a third-year student of architecture at the Faculty of Architecture at the Tbilisi Academy of Arts. She was age 19. Her father was Soviet physicist Vladimir Petviashvili, who co-authored the Karamazov-Petviashvili equation. However, her father lived in Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union, and her mother, Tinatin, still lived in Tbilisi. However, her parents had divorced when Petviashvili was aged just 3. Then there was 21-year-old hijacker German Mikhailovich Kobatkidze, who went by Gega, and in the lead-up to the hijacking, the 7 participants undertook practice pistol shooting in his house. Kobatkidze was an actor at the Georgia Film. He had very good connections to advance his career, with his mother, Natella Machavariani, an actress, and his father, Mikhail Kobatkidze, a director, screenwriter, actor and composer. He was doing pretty well as an actor and had just shot scenes of the Soviet movie Repentance. 25-year-old David Razdanovich Mikhaberidze was a fourth-year student at the Tbilisi Academy of Arts and a manager at the Intourist Construction Trust. Intourist, based in Moscow, is the oldest Soviet travel company. 26-year-old Kaka Vasevich Ivrielli graduated from the Moscow People's Friendship University, now the People's Friendship University of Russia, or the RUDN University. Ivrielli was a resident of the Department of Surgery at the Tbilisi Medical Institute. 30-year-old Pater Vasevich Ivrielli was the brother of Ivrielli and a doctor, having graduated from the Moscow People's Friendship University. Finally, we have 32-year-old Grigory Teimurovich Tabidze. His father, Teimuraz Tabidze, was director of a design bureau of the State Committee for Industrial and Technical Education, and his mother was a teacher, Mary Tabidze. However, Tabidze seemed to contradict the other hijackers. He was unemployed and a drug addict. However, exactly what drugs he did is unknown. He was convicted 3 times of robbery, car theft, and malicious hooliganism. They were able to use their connections at Georgia Film to watch the educational film Alarm, which was commissioned by the USSR Ministry of Civil Aviation. This was a 1983 64-minute feature film telling about attempts to hijack a Tu-134B aircraft. In essence, it was a training video for Aeroflot crew outlining what to do in the event of a hijacking. The 7 saw this movie alone, and without their connections they would never have been able to see Alarm, as it was only meant for Aeroflot crew, and indeed they used many of the actions of the hijackers in the hijacking of Aeroflot Flight 6833. On the 17th of November 1983, Kobakidze and Tintin Petviashvili got married. One of the guests was Anna Varimashvili, a distant friend who was a shift duty officer at the international sector of the Tbilisi airport. One day later, Kobakidze, Petviashvili, Mikhabaridze and Tstratelli travelled to Tbilisi airport under the guise of travelling to Batumi in Georgia for their honeymoon. Batumi is a coastal city and the second largest Georgian city by population. A quick 45-minute flight, or 261 kilometres or 162 miles as the crow flies from Tbilisi. The other 3 hijackers arrived at the airport at a later stage. In addition, their friends Anna Melvia and Evgenia Shalutashvili travelled aboard the flight to Batumi. However, none of them knew of the true reason for the trip. The Aeroflot flight was initially to be a simple turnaround flight from Tbilisi to Batumi and to be operated by a Yak-40. Built by the Sagatov Aviation Plant from 1966 until 1981, a combined 1,012 Yak-40s were built. It's a short-range aircraft able to travel 1,800 kilometres or 1,100 miles, but only has 3 crew members, 2 pilots and a flight mechanic with no flight attendant. At the most, the Yak-40 can only carry 32 passengers. With 7 hijackers and 2 additional friends, even had the Yak-40 been full, it would have represented a pretty good chance of the hijackers to hijack the aircraft. However, there was only one problem. It was mid-November and not a popular time to travel to Batumi, with the temperature there only reaching an average maximum of 16 degrees centigrade during November and 12 rainy days. Not a fun time to travel to a coastal town. So there weren't enough passengers for Aeroflot to justify a Yak-40 to operate this route. As a result, Aeroflot came up with a pretty unique idea. They put them on board a Tupelov TU-134A, which would go from Tbilisi to Batumi, with a flight then going on to Kiev in modern-day Ukraine, and then on to Leningrad, today St. Petersburg, which is now in Russia. This represented a significant thorn in the hijackers' plan. Not only did this aircraft have 2 flight attendants, but the Tu-134 was a far bigger aircraft. The Tupelov TU-134 was built from 1966 until 1989 and primarily designed for short and medium haul routes. A combined 854 aircraft were built. But this aircraft can carry between 72 and 84 passengers and has 6 crew members, including the flight attendants. This really made the hijackers' job a lot more difficult. Arriving at Tbilisi airport, they brought with them 2 TT pistols, 2 Nagant system revolvers, and they had 2 hand grenades, which it turned out were 2 training hand grenades and were not operational. At the airport, they met Varishmashvili, who just allowed them to pass through without her checking on her friends. The Tu-134 operating that flight was registered USSR 65907 and factory number 3352108 and serial number 21/08, and produced by the Kharkov State Aviation Production Enterprise in Monday, Ukraine on the 17th of December 1973. On the 8th of February 1974, she was transferred to the Georgian wing of Aeroflot. The Tu-134A was a true workhorse, having performed 10,506 takeoff and landing cycles and flown a combined 13,273 hours. The Tbilisi-based crew consisted of 40-year-old pilot Akhmatger Bukulovich Gadapadze, co-pilot Stanislav Gabarayev, 29-year-old navigator Vladimir Baroyevich Gasoyan, flight mechanic Anzor Iosovich Chedia, as well as 2 flight attendants, Valentina Nikolaevna Kurtkova and Irina Nikolaevna Kimich. However, there was one extra person aboard, the inspector Naven Telemanovich Shabatayan, who was the deputy head of the flight navigation department of the Georgian Civil Aviation Administration. On the 15th of October 1970, Aeroflot Flight 244 was hijacked, the first successful hijacking of an aircraft in the Soviet Union, which was hijacked by father and son duo Pranas Brazinskars and Algidar Brazinskars, with the aircraft making it to Trabzon, Turkey, and it was a massive embarrassment for the Soviet government. By the way, we did an earlier video on the hijacking of Aeroflot Flight 244, so please don't forget to check that video out. As a result, since then, the captain and navigator of all Aeroflot flights had been armed with inspectors aboard flights. However, there was no inspector aboard Aeroflot Flight 6833. Aeroflot Flight 6833 took off on the 18th of November at 3:43 p.m. to make the quick first run to Batumi. Including the 7 hijackers, a combined 50 passengers were aboard. Just after 4 p.m, the flight was scheduled to descend to land in Batumi. Batumi is right nearby the Turkish border and just 34 kilometers by air to Hopa in Turkey. However, things continued to not go that well for the hijackers. At 4 p.m, the flight was scheduled to descend to land into Batumi. However, due to strong crosswinds, the air traffic controller told the crew to return to Tbilisi, as they would be unable to land in Batumi. But the passengers were unaware of this. At 4:13 p.m, Tistratelli, Tabitse and Ivrieli took Kurtkova hostage and headed towards the cockpit. The remaining 4 hijackers began shooting at any passenger who resembled a representative of the aviation security services. Passenger A. Solomonaya, and I do apologize as I couldn't find his first name, was killed, with A. Plotko and A. Gavarila, and I do apologise as I couldn't find both of their first names, seriously injured. Plotko was a navigator for Aeroflot, however they were a passenger aboard this flight. Then they forced Kurtkova to ask the pilots to open the cockpit door, with the hijackers bursting into the cockpit, demanding that they fly to Turkey. The crew refused, with Tabitse opening fire, seriously wounding Shabatayan and Gasoyan. However, they did not notice Gasoyan behind a curtain, and he opened fire with his pistol, killing Tabitse and seriously wounding Tistratelli. The remaining hijackers moved back into the cabin, with a now wounded Gadapadze firing at them. Both of the Ivrieli brothers were wounded. Gabarayev, despite being wounded, took control of the Tupelov and began sharp maneuvers to knock the hijackers off their feet, with the load on the fuselage and supporting structures exceeding the permissible limit 3 times, with the overload of plus 3.15 Gs and minus 0.6 Gs respectively. However, somehow the Tupelov remained intact. Due to this, Gasoyan dragged a wounded Kurtkova and Shabatayan, as well as the carcass of Tabitse, into the cockpit, closing the door and locking it shut. Captain Gadapadze transmitted an alarm signal to the ground and began returning to Tbilisi. Unable to get back into the cockpit, further shots were fired into the cockpit door, with Aboyan killed and 5 further passengers wounded. Ironically, Miliva and Shalshayvili, who they had brought aboard the aircraft as friends, were wounded, as were passengers I. Chikhladze, I. Inashvili, and I. Kunderenko. Getting onto the intercom, they once again demanded to the pilots that they wanted to go aboard and to take the aircraft to Turkey, which the pilots refused. Taking advantage of the bad weather and the now darkness outside, at 9:20 p.m, the crew landed at Tbilisi airport. As they were taxiing, Kimmich and Krutikova opened one of the emergency exits over the wing, and Kimmich jumped onto the runway and ran away from the aircraft. Krutikova did not have the chance to escape and was killed by Mikhabaridze. Realizing that they had landed back in Tbilisi, Mikhabaridze committed suicide. However, by 7 p.m. local time, a task force of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs consisting of K. Mashnin, N. Dabakashvili, V. Gegenchikori, M. Japaridze, E. Elizabashvili, N. Lavrentashvili, B. Saiganova, T. Okrostrasvitse, and T. Kasitse had arrived at Tbilisi Airport and the landing site of the western edge where Aeroflot Flight 6833 had arrived was cordoned off by the military. Following the escape of Kimmich, a passenger sitting next to the emergency exit, a young trainee pilot, jumped out and ran for his life. However, the cordon believed that he was a terrorist and fired at him. The individual was wounded and many bullets hit the Tupelov TU-134. Indeed, by the end of the raid, a total of 108 bullets had hit the aircraft. The crew attempted to relay to stop firing at the innocent passenger using the radio, but the bullets had damaged the radio. The military got rescue ropes through the windows in the cockpit, and all were able to escape except for Shabatayan, who was unable to squeeze through the window and died a few hours later in the cockpit. This left the passengers on board as hostages, and they would later tell Soviet journalists about the horrors that they were witnessing. El Darchiditse noted that all passengers were forced to cover the windows to the plane with their hands and bodies to show that they were still alive. G. Basilitse noted one of the passengers turned to Ivranelli with a request for permission to go to the toilet, to which he replied, "All the passengers will soon die anyway, so there is nothing to be ashamed of. You can relieve yourself right on the spot." Simultaneously, while on the tarmac, an injured Kudarenko said that while on the carpet, Pata Ivrielli sat in their seat and asked if they were wounded, insisting that they showed them where the wound was because they were a doctor. Ivrielli then said to Kudarenko, "This is a serious wound. You probably won't survive. If you want, I'll shoot you so you don't have to suffer." The hijackers took one passenger who they used to negotiate with the military. Deputy head of the Georgian Civil Aviation Administration, Kazanayevaya, whose first name I couldn't find, began to negotiate with the hijackers. They reiterated through the unassuming passenger their demands to refuel and to go to Turkey, otherwise they would blow up the plane. The passenger who was negotiating managed to escape, breaking his leg in the process. However, the hijackers refused to surrender, knowing that it would equate to certain death. First Secretary of the Central Committee, Eduard Shevardnadze, and the chairman of the State Security Committee, Alexei Inaluri, as well as Minister of Internal Affairs, Guram Gevatantse, and the Prosecutor General of the Republic arrived at Tbilisi Airport to undertake negotiations. The parents of the hijackers were also brought to try to get them to surrender. However, the hijackers refused to negotiate, stating that they would kill 3 passengers every hour and blow up the plane. However, something was happening behind the plane, 20 metres behind to be exact, in an RAF minibus. An operational group of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the GSSR received an order from the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of Georgia, Major General V. Shaduri, to prepare for storming the plane and releasing passengers. However, after half an hour, this was cancelled. This was because the Directorate A of the KGB under the Alpha Group, an elite Soviet special unit, had been organised and sent from Moscow to Tbilisi. This had been requested by Shevardnadze. Group commander was Major General Gennady Zaitsev, while leadership was entrusted to Major Mikhail Golovatov. They were given a Tu-134 for training. By this stage, it was the 19th of November. Under the pretext of maintenance, fuel was drained and preparations were made for the assault, and lighting around the aircraft was turned off. The assault group surrounded the cockpit and wings of the Tu-134. At 10:55 a.m. local time on the 19th of November, they entered the plane in 3 groups through the cockpit and the doors over the wings, beginning the assault. The hijackers tried using the grenades, but these did not work. This lasted 4 minutes and no one was injured. As a result of their injuries, Kimmich and Plotkov remain disabled. A combined 7 people were killed, however 5 terrorists remained alive, with 12 people injured, with both of the Ivrieli brothers injured. Garapadze and Gayosyan were awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, with the remainder of the crew as well as Gatapse and Gayosyan receiving the Order of Lenin and the Gold Star Medal. The aircraft received critical damage and was written off on the 23rd of January 1984 and scrapped for metal. However, what motivated the hijackers? Well, they wanted to make it to Turkey and then ideally to the United States of America, just like the Brazinskars' father and son had done. The hijackers were held in detention for 9 months. During this time, on the 3rd of October 1984, Tistratelli died under mysterious circumstances. He was allegedly wounded in the throat and bled to death, and it was alleged that doctors refused to save him. On the 23rd of August 1984, the Supreme Court of the Georgian SSR sentenced Chikhladze, Kaka Ivrieli and Pata Ivrieli, as well as German Kobakidze, to death. The verdict was broadcast live on Soviet television. They appealed their sentences, however this was rejected by the Presidium of the Supreme Court of the Georgian SSR. The 4 death sentences were carried out on the 3rd of October 1984 at 5:05 p.m. It is believed that this was authorised by Shevardnadze to increase his power within the Georgian SSR. Petshevili got 14 years in prison. She was pregnant at the time but held in an isolation cell. It is alleged that her stomach was cut open with a forced abortion so that her sentence would not be reduced for being pregnant. Vasimashvili was found guilty of aiding the hijacking and got 3 years probation. The movie Repentance had scenes featuring Kobakidze reshot with actor Merab Ninidze, following searches carried out by the KGB of the GSSR. A memorial with the names of Garapadze, Gabarayev, Chedia and Kurtkova was left at Tbilisi Airport. On the 18th of January 1989, a protest rally was held in Tbilisi for the release of Fetviashvili from prison. However, this came to nothing. But in October 1990, the Georgian Supreme Council was elected and dominated by the pro-independence bloc Round Table Free Georgia. A referendum was held on the 31st of March 1991 with a simple question: do you support the restoration of the independence of Georgia in accordance with the Active Declaration of Independence of Georgia on 26 May 1918? This passed pretty resoundingly. 90.57% of the eligible Georgian population rocked up to vote, with 99.49% or 3,295,493 people voting in favour of Georgian independence. Georgian independence would change, or at least try to change, the perception of the hijacking of Aeroflot Flight 6833, and try to conceptualise the hijackers as somewhat heroes, trying to show that they were escaping the oppressive Soviet Union for freedom. In 1991, Petviashvili received an amnesty of their sentence, and the new Georgian president, Zviad Gamkaswidia, who would hold office of the Georgian president from the 14th of April 1991 until the 6th of January 1992. In November 1991, an article published in Tavisupali, Georgia, released an article analysing what it called the senseless massacres of the Georgian hijackers attempting to fight for freedom and independence while trying to leave the Soviet Union by plane. It was a pretty accurate reflection of how many Georgians would feel about the hijacking. In 2001, the K. Marjanishvili Theatre in Tbilisi attempted to stage a play about the hijacking called The Genes Generation or The Belated Requiem. What a title. However, the theatre is government-owned, and Shevardnadze criticised it, and instead it was played at the privately owned Tbilisi Freedom Theatre, where it gained popularity in Georgia. In 2003, the documentary Bandits was released, analysing the hijacking and its background. It received pretty good reviews and was screened at numerous international film festivals and broadcast in German and French in 2004. It aired on the first channel of the Georgian public broadcaster in 2004. Dato Turishvili wrote the book Flight from the USSR in 2008. The memorial to the crew was destroyed in 2012. In 2017, the Georgian movie Hostages was released, outlining the hijacking. However, it was heavily criticised by critics and a financial flop, only released in Russia and Georgia. Gardadze is still alive and works as a pilot instructor at the Tbilisi Aviation Enterprise. Following the independence of Georgia in the early 1990s, Gasayan moved to Moscow in Russia and worked at Moscow Shemetov. airport before retiring in 2014. On the 21st of June 2019, Russian President Vladimir Putin banned Russian airlines from serving Georgia. However, this was lifted as of May 2023. Aeroflot, however, have yet to return to Georgia. In 2002, due to stricter noise regulations, the Tu-134 was banned from most EU airports, with Aeroflot operating the last Tu-134 on the 1st of January 2008, and Mother Russia flying its last commercial Tupelov TU-134 on the 22nd of May 2019, with the flight operated by Alrosa Airlines. The only passenger airline to still operate the Tupelov TU-134 as of 2023 is North Korea's national airline Air Koryo. Thank you for watching. Please do yourself a favour and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be informed of when new videos come out. Also, why not hit that like button and leave a nice comment? It helps more than you know and your support is truly appreciated. Until next time, stay awesome, stay classy, be kind to everyone you meet, have an amazing day, and remember the truth is always more interesting than fiction.